The Whitegrass Heritage Project is an effort to document the history of the Whitegrass Dude Ranch, which began in 1913 and is located at the base of the Grand Teton mountain range, just north of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The Whitegrass Dude Ranch was considered a successful operation in an era when western dude ranches flourished and catered to an eastern clientele who were typically wealthy and well-educated. It was not uncommon for individuals, couples, and families to come and stay at Whitegrass for 4 weeks or longer, and to return year after year. As a result, many lifelong relationships were established between ranch dudes and wranglers. After owner Frank Galey died in 1985, the ranch was abandoned, and the remaining 13 log structures deteriorated. In 2005, the Grand Teton National Park partnered with the National Trust for Historic Preservation to rehabilitate the ranch structures and to transform the former dude ranch into an educational center that would teach the skills needed to preserve historic structures in national parks throughout the western states. The interview that follows documents some aspects of life at Whitegrass, either when it was a dude ranch or what it took to preserve the ranch and turn it into a national park training facility. A generous grant from the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University is making this project possible.
I think that part of the reason that I was sent to Salt Lake is they were trying to socialize me. I think I was sent east to cultivate me. You know, young ladies are supposed to be able to play piano and play bridge. Well, a total failure at both. Give me a bowling any day, or sheepshank, or double diamond, or and I don't know that I really got along any better in the East. You know, you're supposed to dance, you're supposed to play ball. Well, all growing up years, I didn't play ball. I couldn't see the thing coming. I'd run or duck.
Mm-hmm.
And again, one of the culture parts of the East, it's, you know, who you're related to, who you know. That is what defines who you are. Whereas in the West, it's what you make of yourself that is your essence. It doesn't matter whether your parents were high mucky mucks or street urchins.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's what you do and what your character is. And that was so foreign to me. You're supposed to be able to dance. So there was a lot of difficulties, but the headmistress there was just so astute, and you know, I wasn't much better behaved there than anywhere else, and I would get a number of demerits, which meant that I was not supposed to go to the concert. I was supposed to stay in study hall. Well, the headmistress said, "Cynthia, what are you doing this day?" "Oh, I have 10 minutes." "You, of all people, need to go to the concert. You've got 10 minutes to get in your dress and get in the bus." And she recognized that I loved to read and I revered books because somebody wrote them and there was information in them. And she put me on the library committee. I learned how to repair books. As you can, some of it still stands.
Mm-hmm.
I'd read a lot. I mean, I remember even in Roland Hall, I read so many of the Russian, heavy Russian, Quiet Flows the Dawn, things like that, just absorbed it. Would I think of reading that today? No way. But I did then.
But it stuck with you because the way you write and the way you speak, you can see that influence of literature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Keep going.
Then they had horses there, and Mother thought that was, it's going to be a grand thing. Actually, they found the school through some guests here that lived in Connecticut, actually, Larry and Alice Messler, and their two girls are going to be here for the reunion,
Mm-hmm.
Anne and Carol. And so they found the school through them.
Mm-hmm.
And there were horses. And
Did you feel at home? Or were the horses somehow
They-
different than being...
no, there you have the importance is not actually feeling and riding the horse. It is controlling the horse.
Mm-hmm.
Being straight, being upright, popular. Keep your hands just right like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you do that when you're going up and down mountains and jumping irrigation ditches but they had one Western horse. They wouldn't let me ride him because we fell into our Western ways. Like we'd relax and enjoy each other.
Yeah, interesting.
The other thing that just drove them crazy, I'd start jumping and the horse would try to shy away. First thing I'd do is kick my feet out of the stirrups, get my legs around the horse so I could control him. Oh, no, 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 no. But I made him do what I was supposed to. No, no, no.
Wow.
So there was...
Wow.
I can see you laughing.
Culture shock here. So what about at that point in time, it sound who sent you to Philadelphia? Did you send yourself or was it?
No. Actually, in the process of, okay, you're graduating from Fox Hollow, what are you doing now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the option was college. And so I remember taking a train to Boston for an interview with Colorado State College. And I was supposed to meet at a certain room at a certain time, and all of that just got fouled up, probably with my dyslexia, which
Mm-hmm.
I honestly gave to my son especially. But anyway, just got lost in that whole process. And I think I finally got to the interview, but I was late. I was asking questions that were just totally out of the box for what they were expecting and what their program was. Just a nightmare of an experience. Though I've been flying back and forth across the United States, or from Idaho Falls to Salt Lake City by myself since 6th grade. Somehow that just was a nightmare. Anyway, did go and visit another college in Boston that was art oriented and was really, really interested, did apply, and I was not chosen in the first round of choices. I was the second. Well, in that interim, my mother and dad decided that I needed skills that I could feed myself. So they sent tuition and application together to Philadelphia School of Office Training, and that's where I went.
Okay. What year did you graduate from high school in Massachusetts? I'm trying to just put a chronology.
61?
Okay. All right. And so about 61, you went to Philadelphia.
Yes.
And did you finish the course?
Yes.
Okay, a year-long course
A
in
year-long course.
office management.
Typing, shorthand, which I failed. Bookkeeping, I did okay. And I stayed with my Aunt Mopsy and her husband in Penland. They both drank a lot. There was an assortment of male cousins, both from the Ingersolls and Mopsies, that would come and go, and there were no locks on my bedroom door, so that caused some problems that I was able to fight my way out of. I usually walked. I had to wear high heels, had to wear a dress, had business clothing. Had about a mile to walk from Orthodox Cottage to the train that would take me into town. And when it started snowing, that was a difficulty. And I do remember writing my dad a very, very couched letter proving that if I bought a car that he would finance, that I could get onto the main line, which would mean I wouldn't be walking in the snow with nearly barefooted, that I wouldn't have to be walking the underground tunnels through downtown Philadelphia, which scared me to death. They're really creepy people, in this world. That would take me closer to school, easier walk. And so I convinced him to send me $100 to buy the car. It was a 41 Plymouth. It was older than I was.
Did you get it?
I did.
Okay.
It had bare tires. When it was damp out, you had to dry the spark plugs before it would start.
Oh my gosh.
I carried a box of ashes behind the driver's seat, so if it started being slippery, I'd open the door and I'd throw ashes under the hind tire so I'd have traction.
Oh my gosh. Wow. What happened after that year at the business school?
Well, actually, toward the end of that, Jim Kinker, who was working here that summer and actually invited me out a couple times, granted as a group, but it was like the first time anybody had ever shown any interest. He came to Erie, where his folks lived, and came to Philadelphia and visited me briefly. And so when I came back west,
to work here at the summertime?
Yeah. My 41 Plymouth was not a good enough car to drive west. So I had to sell it, which I did to my uncle, who then ran a stop line and it was destroyed. But anyway, I had to drive west with my cousin Fran Fox and Lori and their baby, who was sick to start with. Now his Ford vehicle, sedan, kept overheating, so he took the thermostat control off of the vehicle so he could drive it west. With a screaming baby, he has a very short fuse, made a misturn somewhere near Riverton and ended up in Cody. He came to me and said that if he wasn't back by the morning, would I please take care of Lori and the baby and get him to Jackson? And he went off on a drunk. He did arrive in the morning. We did get to Jackson. At Moose, he threw me out. He wasn't going to drive me up to the ranch. He just left me. Went into the post office and they called the ranch, and somebody came and got me. So that was my trip back, and probably the beginning. Then that was before the dude season. Jim was here.
Working as a wrangler?
He was the dishwasher.
Okay. But I read he was also going to Utah State
yes.
in Logan, Utah,
right.
as a student.
Right.
Okay.
And so he was up here for a weekend or something when I came from the east.
Mm-hmm.
And so after dinner, we walked clear up past the north pasture up by Balderson's and back. And by then it was dark, and Dad was coming up this way because he was thinking the worst of us at least. And Cynthia, you come down to the house. Jim, you come down to the house. So it was either we're not going to have some lovebirds working on the ranch because they're not going to work. So either Jim has to find another job or you two get married.
Oh my gosh.
So we got married.
Wow. And then worked the summer here on the ranch?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And at that point, I think that he started the float trips. He was working as a wrangler. Really wasn't good with animals. He started doing the float trips that Dad had done in the past, but sold much more of them. So he was on the river almost every day,
Mm-hmm.
either scenic or floating. And then the following year, we had the trailer up here. No, actually, we had a tent. We were living in a tent because there was cabins for employees, there was cabins for dudes, there was a house for the Galeys, and I didn't fit in.
Yeah.
So we had a tent on the far side of the creek here, and when Tammy when we were working at the let's see, my first child was David. Let's start there. When David was born, we came back to live in the tent. 3 years, and then to school in the winter time. First to Logan and then to Laramie.
Mm-hmm.
And then 3 years later, Tammy was born. We were still living in the tent from Memorial Day through Labor Day. And you already know how cool it is out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They would wake up with frozen diapers, but they were healthy.
Oh my gosh.
Tried to get Jim to put a wood stove in the tent, but he was too distracted or too busy or something, and I ended up installing the wood stove in the tent. And then he would invite people home to the tent for dinner without acknowledging it. Well, the running water was the ditch. We had no electricity. It was those little tin stoves, you can't even cook on them. So it's cooking outside, but then I don't have any supplies.
Mm.
So he'd come home and say, "Oh, I've invited so-and-so to dinner," and I'd be running down to the Dornans to grab some food to throw in the campfire. I remember some of the first baked potatoes, they just wouldn't get soft. They just stayed hard, and they stayed hard, and they stayed hard, and finally I unwrapped them, and they were black all the way through.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Wow. But Jim were you both working on the ranch, or were you just taking care of the kids?
No,
And he was
he was working on the ranch. I was driving the float trips mostly.
Okay.
I was helping Mother more in the office.
Okay. Okay.
And just an odd job thing. I wasn't a waitress at that point, or the cabin girl, or at 15 my job was Kid Wrangler.
You know what? This is a perfect time to talk about these things. Now we've talked a lot about context. I do want to come back to your life, but let's talk about life at Whitegrass and what some of the activities that happened here, and then we'll pick up the rest of the story. Sound good?
Can I just ask a question?
Of course, of course.
Lori and Fran Fox that used to live in Crowheart are your cousins?
Yes.
I know them.
Again, this small world here.
Lori's here now in Jackson.
Oh, is she really?
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
Sorry to.
And I think Fran Fox is coming up.
Yes.
I've heard that he's going to be here.
Yeah. Small world. Yeah.
It
All
is.
right.
Yeah, Fran Fox was one of Dad's nephews who really admired Dad and wanted to be another Frank Galey. And in some ways, he has achieved it.
Mhm.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
My ears pricked up there.
That's awesome.
The dude ranch world is very small.
It is.
It is.
Okay.
What is a kid wrangler?
It is a person who is overworked and abused and takes care of the children from sunup to sundown and past.
Okay.
Do you think that catches it?
I think that's pretty good.
All right, for somebody who has no context, let me see if I can throw a little thought out there and tell me if I'm accurate. So the families come up, and mom and dad want to have time away from the kids, want to have some downtime, quiet time, adult time, whatever you call it. So the ranch organizes a day's worth of activities to get the kids out into nature, to give them some experiences. Not a bad thing. I mean,
Right.
so
Okay. Yes. So
is that accurate?
that's accurate. So the Kid Wrangler, at least in my time, and I think Judy Schmidt had the same experience. I worked with her initially, then she had to leave partway through the summer, and it was up to me as a 15-year-old.
Were you the first kid wrangler on Whitegrass?
I think no.
Were the kid?
Judy might have been the first.
Okay.
I wouldn't swear to that.
Okay.
So she started out that season, and she had to leave, and then I was left with it.
But you're part of the first generation of
Oh,
kid
yes,
wranglers. Okay.
yes.
So this was sort of a new thing that happened
Right.
then. Okay. Awesome.
So you get up at 4:30. You saddle a horse. You go and get the horses off the mountain. You come back and you eat. Then you start saddling all the dude horses for the whole ranch, along with the guys. And there's always a lot of joking and practical jokes involved with all of that.
Such as, you remember any examples?
Well, while you're trying to cinch up one side of a saddle and get it all right, they would undo the other side.
Okay.
You know, so you had to start all over again.
Okay.
They'd pull the bridle off the horse while you were trying to mount it.
Okay. All right.
Tomfoolery.
Yep.
Then you'd make the lunches, come up to the main cabin, if there was time, and start making sandwiches for all the people who signed up for day rides. And by then the kids had had breakfast, and they'd be waiting down at the barn for you, and you had to entertain them all day.
What would you do to do that? I mean,
You
was
put
it
them on a horse.
okay?
Put them on a horse.
Yep.
And the trick to me with being a kid wrangler was knowing the characters of the horses, and then putting the appropriate child on the horse. So there'd be, like, some of the old pack horses were the most fabulous kids' horses. You'd put this little kid up there, and a big horse, feet sticking straight out, have no sense of balance, and a good pack horse would just move sideways. They'd keep under the rider, literally.
Wow.
We never led them. It was okay. This is how you turn them. This is how you stop them. But basically, the horses followed one another.
Mm-hmm.
So different levels of riding, different ages, and then again, if you had like a teenager who just thought he was hot stuff, you'd put him on a dud of a horse so he wouldn't get in trouble. Because if you put him on a horse that might be the right experiential he would be a pain in the butt. He'd get himself in trouble.
Yeah. Get himself hurt.
Him or her. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not being sexist here.
Right.
Remember, you know, one time I had a bunch of children. We'd gone down toward the JY, not the JY, RLAZS and Circle H Ranch, which no longer are there. And it started hailing, and I thought, oh boy, are we going to have a rodeo? And so I said, okay, trot. Now stay right smack in line. I said, this is really serious. This is important. Stay right in line. Stay right behind me. And then I realized we weren't going to make it to the ranch. I said, okay, follow me. We're going into the thickest trees to protect us from protect the horses, to protect us from the hails. And we literally just rode into the thickest Douglas fir patch I could spot, and just hung out all clustered together. And I said, we didn't have a rodeo. I don't have any kids on the ground. Hallelujah.
Yeah. Wow.
So the interesting part, they separated the kids from the grown-ups, and kids really had a separate program then, so that the grown-ups really had sort of
Well,
built.
they would go fishing. A lot of them fished, a lot of them read, a lot of them would ride for, long rides. And absolutely, sometimes the families went together. It just was, there was always this other part. So by 4:30, you had to be back to the ranch, had to unsaddle. The kids went up to the cabin, unsaddled. If you're real lucky, you might get a shower in about that time before you're on duty again, eating with the children,
Oh, yeah.
taking care of them till their parents were done with their cocktail party, their dinner, their after dinner, whatever. So it was like at 10 at night, you'd be released.
Wow. To start again at 4:30?
Yeah. And at that point, Jim and I were not at that point, I was living with my folks, but later when I still had the same job, we're living in a tent up in the woods right back here, and the tent leaked and it was a wet summer. And so that time that I would shower, I'd be painting the canvas with a sealer, a little piece at a time before it started raining again, or it's too wet in the morning.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Wow. You know what? As back in June, I came up to do a little bit of work and that, and I got to meet Sharon for the first time, who also has this incredible dude ranch experience, and she talked about the horse being the central part of the dude ranch. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about horses. Why don't you talk about the role of the horse?
Absolutely. And I think that everybody that you'll see on Saturday, and probably those at the barn, the rest of the ranch, it's the ranch. The barn was the center point, and the barn is gone. And the barn, the way we visit it in Wilson, it's not the barn. It doesn't have the ramp. The front's turned front to back. I mean, the inside that was all hand-hewn log, floor, stalls, all the wonderful cross timbers, that's gone.
So we're just going to a shell in Wilson?
So it's, what is original is shell.
Okay.
And one of my greatest hidey holes, unless I was somewhere up the mountain, was in the loft. There were two great big stringer logs across with a cable that held those walls together, because it was longer than any tree, even the lodge poles are. So you stacked the hay in there, and the hay didn't fit under those two stringers. It fit up to it, went over it. And you could climb up the horse stanchions, cross that, and down the cow. And my dad promised me a vehicle if I didn't smoke until I was 18. And he accused me of smoking up there. And I never did, but he never believed me.
Well, now the barn. If the barn is sort of like the heart and soul, it's because the horses
because of the horses
are
because
there.
of the horses.
Yeah. So talk about your experiences with the horses. I know that when we talked on the phone, I felt I'll just say a love for those animals.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you mentioned their names. You mentioned the mare that died in your lap. You mentioned a lot of these things.
And it's funny. I remember one of the first reunions. We're showing slides, and said, "Well, I don't remember that person, but that's Sonny Boy, and that's Injun, and that's Coon, and we could name all the horses."
Yeah.
And one of my self-appointed jobs was starting a book of the lineage of all the horses.
Wow.
And so Penny had nickel and dime and shilling.
Awesome names.
We tried, where that worked, we tried to do that because it simplified things. But yeah, like I was saying earlier, they're honest. What they are is what they are. There's no pretense. If they're ornery horse, it's going to be an ornery horse. Always. You know what you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I said, choosing horses for children. That horse had that personality, those characteristics. They were honest. They were true. They didn't change. Yeah, I have just high respect for animals.
You talk about knowing the personalities of the horses. Does the horse know your personality? Does the horse know you?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Different people walk up to a horse and you can sense, and, when I first started working wilderness, this is kind of an extreme example, but I was given a horse they named Rambo, and horses' names often have to do with their temperament.
Mm-hmm.
And after we had an accident up there, Rambo decided that it had had enough of literally dragging Charlie the mule. It headed for thick timber that I wasn't going to fit through, and it wasn't stopping. So I grabbed a hold of the bit and pulled it around to my leg, which makes it go in a circle.
Uh-huh.
Well, at that point, the circle ended up being around a tree, which it fell against, using my leg as a bumper, so it didn't have broken ribs. It didn't break in. Well, it broke soft tissue. Is what it did, not bone. Got everybody unwrapped, but then I got another horse. They decided that we weren't safe together. Well, it didn't have to do with that at all. But anyway, so they gave me, I think it was a red roan. He was really wide. He probably had a little bit of light drafted horse in him. Just honest as the day is long, willing, and their ears talk.
How so?
They listen to you by turning their ears back and forth. If they prick them up to listen for sounds that we can't hear. And on this particular occasion, he was getting restless. His ears were just doing this, and then back to me. What do you want me to do about this? I'm hearing things. What do you want me to do? And so I let him slow down because you listen. Animals are trustworthy.
Yeah.
And started watching for tracks, trying to pick up odors myself, and just beginning to cross a little stream, and there was a track. The track was as wide as my hand is long. 4 inches past that were claw marks.
Oh my gosh.
And the water was running into the track. It was so fresh. Grizzly.
Wow.
Big
Wow.
grizz.
The
So
horse knew it.
the horse knew it before I did. And if I hadn't been listening
Yeah.
and watching, I could have been in trouble.
Wow.
Now, there's no problem being in grizzly territory. I mean, they're as natural out there as the trees.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own, again, being an animal, they have their own characteristics. If you know them, you can use them and be cautious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we did go on into a camp, and the grizzlies are very, very gracious. They make their own door into a tent and outside of a tent. And then meanwhile, inside, they're trying to find food, so everything is torn apart.
Yeah.
And the two people in camp were absolutely hysterical.
Who wouldn't be, right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I had to deal with all of that. But yeah, it's, you know, and the same here on the ranch. You know, Judy was one of my early horses. Well, I'll start with Eva. Eva was my first horse. And she was my first babysitter after the two-legged one wore out. And she happened to be a Palomino, beautiful big eye, longest lashes of any horse. No, that was a mule. I know a mule that had longer lashes, just gorgeous. And she was a little bit barn sour, and this is probably one of the reasons she was given to me. Barn sour means she's going to come home, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Dad wouldn't let me have a saddle because I could get hung up.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what, you learn to ride when you don't have a saddle between you and your animal. Because you can feel it. You can feel it tense up. You can feel it stretch. You know what's going on. And I trained a lot of the horses, not well, but enough that I could just knee rein them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't need to use the reins.
Wow.
And lots of times I've braided myself. It's a 3-strand braid, but both ends are closed, leather. And it had a loop buckle on it, and I could put that around its lower jaw. So I could just go out in the field, catch a horse, put that around its lower jaw, get up, and I'm ready to go. And so Eva was just the most gentle, gracious lady. She really was. And on pack trips, I remember one pack trip we went up Death Canyon. It's plodding up the canyon. And I took a nap. A bareback. I went to sleep.
Wow.
Woke up when we got up on top.
Wow.
Yeah. A real constant, more constant than any human in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The horses have been.
Mm-hmm. But let me ask a couple of questions about some people who I think are key staff members here.
Mm-hmm.
And if I've missed some people, then you can talk about it. And something that's interesting, you talked about you're not really fitting in anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That there was, here's mom and dad running the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the dudes, you're not really a dude. Here's the hired help, the college kids, you're not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the I'll call them sort of the administrative staff, kind of like Rachel and the
Mm-hmm.
head wrangler and that kind of thing. So you had kind of an interesting association with her. You're not in a group, but you're attached to all of the groups in
Mm-hmm.
some way.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of interesting. So let's start. We've talked a little bit about Rachel. Did you know her nickname? Did Judy ever tell you the nickname?
Wretched? That's one of them.
I hadn't heard that one. I heard the whip.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So apparently Rachel was kind of a
She
good.
and her mother were a good fit in managing.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So talk just. Again, think like a historian, and how would you describe the role that this staff member played at Whitegrass?
She made sure that everything ran smoothly, that the product, the supplies were here. A lot of that was hand in hand with Mother, but a lot of it was on her own. She, with a list, usually from Dad, which was probably not complete, she would gather, organize, and roughly pack what was needed for pack trips. Matches was always a key thing that sometimes didn't happen. But there were a lot of smokers in those days.
Did they have flint and steel, or a cigarette lighter?
Smokers in those days.
Okay.
And it's a good way to light a match. Did you know that?
No, I've never tried it.
That way?
No, I've tried the thumbnail. That's as close as
I
I've
think
gotten.
somebody else has, though.
I've seen it done.
Wow. Wow.
My cousin taught me a match can burn twice, with a flame and then on your skin. So Rachel, she was major part for a long time, and the era that is being recreated, rebuilt, is the era that was very much Rachel.
Yeah.
She was hostess supreme to the guests. She was a strong manager for the employees, especially the girls, not quite so much for the boys, because that was supposed to be under Dad's direction, though it tends to overlap. Trying to control some of the after dark hanky-panky between the male and the female employees.
Was that even possible?
I don't know that it was possible, but
we talked a little bit about it before we started this interview.
Yeah, it's.
Was that part and
helped.
parcel of life at a dude ranch in the 50s and 60s?
I only know one.
Okay.
And my son came up under Nona, and that was his first experience sexually. And I think that dude ranching was probably a lot of people's first experience.
Okay.
There is a freedom away from whatever confines home represented, and that people just express that freedom in lots of different ways, and experimentation was one of them in many levels.
Was it also the way that the girls handled themselves and dressed and interacted? You talked about, or maybe it was Rachel yesterday who talked about, you go back east and everybody has this persona of what your gender role is to be, how you're supposed to dress, etc. You come out to the west, you're away from civilization, and instead of wearing the plaid skirt, you're in Levi's and a cotton shirt. And
both sexes dress just the same. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I never remember any display with clothing of sexuality at all. Not like today especially in Arizona where it's warm, where people are not clad.
Right. Right. But there's also no sense of rank. If everybody's wearing Levi's and a T-shirt or something like that, you don't know if this guy's a millionaire or just some chore boy making 25 cents an hour.
Right.
Right.
I think it wasn't visual, but most people knew that, Jay was a Matthews. They were dudes here before that he started working here. His father did this, whatever it happened to be. So there was pretty much a knowledge of, you know, who the guests,
Okay.
you know, and who the background.
Mhm.
Dad, oftentimes, beside the college kids or the dude kids that had gotten to an age to work here, hired some locals, some Indians,
Mhm.
and the kids learned a lot from those folks. They didn't always have sparkling characters.
Mhm.
You know, sometimes it would mean knife fights down at BQ at night.
People really
Guns
get cut
going.
up,
But it was more.
or just nicked. I mean, we're just talking bravado.
It was more. One in particular, I remember. It could have been really serious if the person that was the aggravator, not the knife holder, didn't back down.
Mhm.
But, you know, when a knife and a serious Indian is looking at you, you better back down
Mhm.
if you're a survivor.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
How did the Indians get along with the rest of the help?
No difference.
No difference.
No, usually it involved alcohol if there was problems, or there was a lot of ownership on what wrangler used, or what several horses, because usually it took 2, maybe 3 a day, because when you start out on a horse running up the mountain at 4 in the morning, it's not going to want to take a running fast ride at 9 o'clock with the guests. That horse needs to downtime. You get your
Mhm.
next horse.
Mhm.
So sometimes it was fights about, well, you did this to my horse, or you took off on my horse, and you know, I was left with whatever.
Mhm.
So it was, yeah, alcohol or about horses. I don't ever remember any altercations about who was sleeping with whom or dating whom. That didn't seem to be a problem.
Hmm. Interesting.
Priorities. Horses.
Horses. Let me come back to the staff. Ben Lewis. Do you know him?
Ben Norman.
No, I've got Lewis.
Ben Lewis.
Yeah, Rachel talked about him a lot yesterday. I had some
Bob.
photos. What's that?
Bob.
Bob Lewis.
Oh, Bob Lewis.
Sorry.
Okay.
Bob Lewis.
Okay.
Let's-
Bob Lewis,
let's-
and then there was another Lewis. Tall guy, wrangled, Eastern, I believe.
All right, so now this is part 2 of the Cindy Galey Peck oral history. And we were talking about just some of your memories of the staff. And I had misspoken in our last session about a Ben Lewis, but what I really am talking about is Bob Lewis.
Bob Lewis, I'm not sure there weren't 2 of them. Bob Lewis, I'm remembering, was a great friend of Mother and Dad and Rachel's, and he built much of the furniture in the main cabin, the tables, chairs. No, he altered the tables, made the chairs, made some really cool lamps out of logs that were shaped like Conestoga wagons.
Yeah.
I said that wrong.
Yeah.
I can't say it right.
Conestoga.
Conestoga. I missed the T. Wagons for lamps for the dining room table. He was quite a character. One story was that he was too drunk to drive, so he went down to the airport and flew.
He did have a plane, and Rachel talked about dropping watermelons on hunting camp. So we're talking about the same guy.
Okay. Yeah, he did. He often would fly supplies into hunting camp and drop them, and it could be from bales of hay to food to watermelons to, alcohol that would be put inside the bale of hay so that it would bounce but not break. It's always important to have alcohol at hunting camp. You know, it keeps your toes warm.
Makes no sense with guns and alcohol. What's wrong with this?
Yeah.
And guys in the wild.
Yeah. Uninhibited because they're out of their cultural milieu. When Granddaddy died, Dad was gone, and Bob stepped in and took care of all of those arrangements. I mean, he was a tremendous support to the ranch.
Okay. But he wasn't paid staff. He was just a friend who sold some things and sold his services, maybe.
I think we bought, you know, the furniture from. We needed this. He said he'd make it. We bought it. You know, he made it. We bought it from him. I don't think he was ever hired as, you know, like on the payroll. But he was up here a lot. He was he was invited to, you know, the cocktail parties and dinner frequently. Okay. He guided fishing trips. And I'm sure that he was, you know, he was paid by the trip, probably directly from the clients rather than through my parents. Just good person.
Okay. George was a head wrangler. George Clover. Okay. Talk about George Clover and talk about the role of a head wrangler. I mean, is he like Rachel's opposite? So Rachel's taking care of the domestic help and...
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. The head wrangler ought to have, you know, chewing skills, you know, taking care of tack, managing young men.
Good luck with that.
Making sure that the horses were saddled, that injured horses didn't get put on trails, that they had time off, that they were doctored. You know, just a multitude of things involved, mostly with horses.
And so, George, talk about George. How long was he here? Do you know how long he was here and his personality?
George was God to me for a while.
Why?
He could do all these things with horses. He taught me to shoe. He taught me braiding leather. He taught me repairing tack. He taught me doctoring horses. Well, he'd hand me the sulfanilamide and crawl under there and put it wherever, you know. He cut me no slack. Remember one trip in particular, I was on a horse named Judy. I think Judy came after Eva. Judy wasn't a good dude horse because you'd get prepared to put the saddle on or mount her, whichever end you were closer to, you'd either get kicked or bit. And I stopped her from biting because I got so exasperated one day. She bit me, I grabbed her ear and bit it back. And boy, they're dusty, dirty ears. But it worked, at least for me. I don't know how it helped other people near her.
Yeah.
But she also had very little wither. She was very narrow, so the saddle tended to go sideways or forwards or backwards. And we were up on the slide that is northwest of the old trail ranch. I'm trying to give a direction here. And we were looking for horses that had been lost for several days, and George was leading us all and kept telling George, my saddle is... No, it's not. You're just fine. George, my saddle's slipping. You're just fine. Well, we jumped over this gully, and the saddle went right over Eva's ears. Judy's ears, with me on it. George, the saddle has slipped. Oh, Okay. um, but and he was rough in many ways. I believe he was trained as either a commando or a SEAL or something like that.
Imagine he's the guy whose hands are
Yeah.
lethal weapons. Okay. Okay.
Um,
How do you get along with Frank and Inga?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that very good, very well.
I would think a head wrangler and owner would have to really be a tight partnership.
They ought to be. Yeah,
Mhm.
and he was. And he was here many, many years. He was here when Rachel and Judy and Elise Morris first came out. And he and Elise married and have 3 children. Galloway's going to be here. He was a pretty good mechanic. His vehicles were always falling apart, but they always made it to the destination some way or another. I remember in later years, Bill and I were coming back from up north somewhere and recognized George's truck loaded to the gills with wood in the fall. I mean, just overflowing and bulging. And it was stopped by the road, and Bill had a half-ton for it. I said, we can pull them in. Well, the truck also didn't have very good brakes, so it was more like we got to a downhill, we had to keep running fast enough to stay in front of it. And we pulled it in. George, one extreme story of his, he was coming out of hunting camp up in the thoroughfare country, and he had a green horse that he was packing, and another one that he was riding. I mean, he had a string of like 4 horses, bringing camp out the last time by himself, and there was a horse wreck, and he was thrown, and he broke 9 ribs, front and back.
Ooh.
And he got the whole group together, got back on the horse, rode it all the way into Turpin Meadows, took care of the horses, unloaded them, and drove himself to the hospital in Jackson. Well, what is the alternative? Lay down and die?
Yeah, none.
It's not an alternative.
Yeah. Wow.
Somebody else, a similar kind of thing, they were up at hunting camp playing quick draw, and shot his foot, put it in a bucket, drove himself to the hospital. Didn't want to get too much blood in the truck, you know.
Wow. 2 other names came up as I was just doing some background reading, and you may or may not know them. And I don't know last names. Curly.
I don't know Curly's last name, but David will give you a really good rundown on Curly.
No,
he
wait.
worked for Curly.
Was Curly also head wrangler?
Curly, I believe, was head wrangler. It was under Nona.
And David said that Curly hated David's guts. That's the story that I got. Or that's what David wrote in that blog.
I believe it.
Okay. All right. What about Cookie?
John J. Cook.
Right.
He was an Army buddy of Dad's. They came up here together after their Army experience. Dad and Cookie were the first people to use a raft on the Snake River.
Wow.
They brought the inflatables from the plains.
Yep.
Fantastic character. His daughter married the Prince of
Sikkim,
yes.
province in northern India. I had to
Right.
look it up.
Yeah. Jackson Hole is a melting pot.
Yeah.
I mean, just unbelievable. But Cookie did a lot of float trips, was a great character. We had a wake for him when he died. That would be his style. Everybody was at Dornan's, and we partied well in remembrance.
Now, he wasn't staff. He was just a friend who kind of did some side businesses that paralleled?
The floating definitely paralleled. I know the time that Dad, instead of trucking the horses across, and this was Nona's time, to Du Bois and down to the reservation, he decided to have a trail drive. And so they had paid guests. So instead of paying to get the horses to winter pasture, he was getting money for getting them to winter pasture.
Yeah.
And Cookie supported that, but his bus did not make it up Togety Pass coming home. But that whole story is a story of itself. My husband and I went on it. They decided that I needed to ride a crazy horse that was supposedly known as, I don't know, but they thought it was easier to control that horse having a rider on it than having it in the herd. And there was no way of controlling it because it was a horse that needed a 38.
Mm-hmm.
There are those. I'm asking, you're confirming that for me.
Yes.
So the first night out, which was at Teton Valley Ranch, I went to the Wranglers and said, if you want me to be helped, I need a horse I can ride. And they said, well, who do you want? Or maybe I said, I want so-and-so. But anyway, I got a horse that I knew and that you could work off of.
Mm-hmm.
And the first day out, you're just pushing the horse. They don't want to go home. This is home, mountain's home. That's not.
Mm-hmm.
And we're putting them in the wrong direction. And so it was just push, push, push. Getting the stragglers, push, 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 all the way across. And
how many miles are we talking about from here to the...
85 miles from here to Du Bois, and then another approximately 75 to 80 to the reservation, depending on how. So you're talking about
160, 170
Yeah.
miles.
well, and he trucked them from Du Bois.
Oh, okay.
So it's just to Du Bois?
Yeah.
Still, that's
But we
85
went
miles.
straight. We went right up the Grovant River, over Lake of the Woods,
Okay.
and down through Du Bois. Well, and the second day out, the horses thought, oh, I know where we're going. And then it was everybody's in front, holding them back. And we went through Du Bois at a full run. People scattered. There was no controlling them at that point.
Yeah.
And thank goodness we had trucks up across the highway, because at that point we finally were on highway, to get them into the holding pasture before they got on the truck and went on down to the reservation.
Wow.
And I remember Judy and I were out front, and we had part of the highway blocked by a truck, but then we were standing in traffic lane to stop people from running over these horses. And there was one truck that was just determined to go by. We laid our foot and our spurs right against that truck and let it run all the way from the beginning to the end.
Wow. Wow.
Thank goodness they didn't run into a horse, but we thought for sure they would.
Let me ask a couple questions about dudes and your association with the dudes. Now, and this is my naivete here, but the only concept I ever had of a dude ranch before I started this project was this movie that they made 20 years ago with Billy Crystal. These guys want to go out and be cowboys.
City Slickers.
City Slickers, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So was that what Whitegrass was all about? To come and pretend to be a cowboy, or was it something different?
It was different.
What was it?
People would come out. We had a fabulous library here. Really, that was the book collection of Bispin.
Mm-hmm.
And people would use that library. I mean, they came out to have quiet time, to ride, to fish. You know, yeah, they loved the riding. If they wanted to pretend to be cowboys, it wasn't like the movie. They would go out with a wrangler to get horses off the mountain in the mornings.
Okay.
And that's a job. That's something that has to be done for the ranch to run and to keep the guests happy, because a lot of what they did is come out to ride.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't the fake extreme stuff
Okay.
at all.
Okay.
Sometimes we'd have gymkhanas. Used to
Which means,
games on horseback.
okay, like, I mean,
Um,
polo?
no, that's polo.
Okay. Okay.
Musical chairs on horseback.
Okay.
You get off and you have to sit on the chair. Sometimes the horses didn't like you flying off the wrong side and landing on a chair, and sometimes the chair didn't like you landing on it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
Capture the Flag, that really wasn't part of a gymkhana, but we did play Capture the Flag, and that's when Ben Norman got his neck broken.
Mm-hmm.
So that stopped that game. I think playing Capture the Flag was one of the times that my horse got into a gopher hole and I had a whole horse land on top of my knee.
Oh my gosh.
It hasn't helped them much, you know, my older age.
Yeah.
Would do barrel racing, but you know, dude speed.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly trotting, sometimes loping a little bit. Nothing like what you see in rodeos.
Okay.
And then several stakes in a row, and you'd weave in and out of that. That would all be kind of gymkhana things.
What about this dude rodeo that I heard about?
Dude Ranchers Rodeo.
Dude Ranchers Rodeo. Was that down in Wilson or in Jackson?
Jackson and Teton Village Ranch.
Okay. Okay.
Started out there because they had the larger facilities because of all the boys, and they had a big arena. And all the ranches would get together and compete, and there would be fast races, there'd be novelty races, walk, trot, and canter. That one little horse that I trained was supreme at that, even though he was short. Heart. That horse had heart to the end of the earth. The horse that wasn't mine.
Mm-hmm.
The slow race, which was you get your slow horses and tried to make them just walk as slow as possible. And Kuhn excelled at that. It'd still be in motion. You couldn't stop motion. You need to put a foot down. And just get that one down, you'd start the next foot.
Wow.
Then there was the slow horse race. That meant you put the other ranch's rider on your slowest horse. They try to make the horse go as fast as it could. And so the fastest slow horse won,
Okay.
rather than the slowest horse winning.
Yeah.
And one time I was in that race, and the horse I was on stumbled, and I was up front, and I went off in front of the whole herd, and one of the heel corks of a horseshoe caught in my nose and ripped it open.
Oh.
I rolled under the fence into the inside,
Wow.
and my mother saw blood. She said, "Okay, we're taking you to the doctor after the rodeo." So, heck with that. I got on a horse and rode home. By then it was too late to stitch it.
Oh my gosh. This rodeo with the several ranches,
Mm-hmm.
was there a good relationship between the
Oh
ranches?
yes,
and,
it was
and
all great fun.
Did
great.
wranglers and staff know each other? And
Yeah.
okay, so it was
There was a lot of interaction between the dude ranches back then.
okay.
And we'd ride to Barbie Sea and have picnics and come back.
Okay.
Not quite so much with Triangle X. They seem to be more insular, and they began to. I think it was primarily they that started getting thoroughbreds and not dude horses for the competitions. But there was Arlesia, Circle H, Whitegrass, Turner's, can't remember the brand right now. I think Elbow was involved. Bear Paw was pretty much gone by then, or they didn't participate. I don't remember them participating. But as it became larger, it did move into the fairgrounds in Jackson.
Okay.
And it would have pack races, have all your gear spread out on the ground with the panniers, with the pack saddle, and a horse.
And you had to
put all that together, tie it down, and run to the end of the arena without it falling apart.
Okay. Wow.
Were
those good memories for you, these rodeos?
Yeah, they were fun.
Did the dudes love it? I mean, did they
the dudes just ate it up.
Yeah.
Just ate it up.
Yeah.
To me it was, it's fun. I'm not very competitive. I'm competitive with me, not with what other people do or think. And I've got to be tough for me.
Yeah.
And no one's supposed to see me cry, but that's really been screwed up this weekend. I've got to be able to do this and that and the other thing. But it's not because somebody's watching, it's because it's me forcing me. And I often say, me, myself, and I, we can do anything. We argue some of the time.
I have a question about that, Cindy. Do you think that some of the dudes, that was part of the appeal of Whitegrass, that they learned to master the horse and that they got a sense of accomplishment in a world that was very different from the one they grew up with, and take it back with them?
I think so. And we probably gave them more freedom on horses than most ranches. I know, for instance, Trianglettes, you never went out without a wrangler. Here, if the head wrangler primarily deemed you competent not to get lost, not to do damage to your animals, you could go do whatever. You didn't need a wrangler. Just say, let us know what direction you're going so that if you don't come home, we know where we'll start looking. But that's a safety thing. That's not a control thing. And there were many, many guests that came year after year, and they'd choose their horses, and yes, they'd be saddled for them. Sometimes they'd unsaddle their own because, again, it was a challenge. It was something they were learning. And they would say, this I'm going to take a picnic to Taggart Lake. And so we'd have the picnic ready at a certain time, and they would tootle off to Taggart Lake or wherever. Chamberlain Trail, people loved going out on the Chamberlain Trail. That goes past Trail Ranch to the old park headquarters. And that's why the horses could go there so easily.
And eat the superintendent's garden. Yeah. What about now, this is kind of an interesting question because you've already said that you kind of stood on the outside, on the margins. But something that I've learned with some of the interviews I've done is that there really was a sense of community, a sense of family. Maybe not with Frank as the dad and Inga as the mom, but the meals that were shared, the activities that they had, the interaction between staff and dudes, that there was this community.
There's definitely a community, yes. And last night, Judy, Rachel, and actually David was sitting there with us, and I was relating. It's part of my childhood, and Rachel's grand said, we are family. Those of us that were there.
Yeah.
And then Judy mentioned to me, which I hadn't realized, is that she thinks Rachel feels like I was a daughter that she never had.
Mm. Wow.
And Rachel's really close to my 2 kids.
Wow.
And
awesome.
She was the one that nicknamed David everybody's baby, because he literally went from person to person to person around the ranch. I mean, he just telling you stories, so happy.
Wow. Yeah. Cool. Let me ask one more small little question, but we haven't recorded anything about it. The silver fox pens.
Yes.
I don't know anything about that.
Pre-World War, that was a way to make money on the off season.
Okay.
And there was, I don't remember the foxes, but I remember the tangles of wire and poles and everything up by what we call the Messler cabin. But that's where Arlie and Twyla Van Winkle lived. And at that point, there was probably, well, after the war, there was no foxes. I mean, I think that went with the wartime.
Okay.
Though Marmee kept the ranch open and ran it all through the war years. I understand it wasn't terribly active.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, they sold silver fox. That was a money-making endeavor.
Okay. So just part of economic survival is what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So let's shift now to well, actually, so what we've been talking about is just kind of like life on the ranch for the staff, for the dudes, for you and your interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other major topics that either of you think are important that we haven't already recorded about life on the ranch? Because the last 2 topics are kind of like your life from 65-ish to now, your path of life,
Mm-hmm.
and then just some reflections on the significance of the place. But can you think of some?
Well, I just like to go a little bit deeper into the sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the social aspect? I mean, was it that people came back when their friends came back, or was it more the place? What was really the defining factor in that sense of community?
I think it was a lot the place, and I think it's a lot of Dad's charisma. Even, he was such a mixture of mainline, cultured Philadelphia, East Coast, this smacking of French, and then in many ways they thought the consummate cowboy rancher. He played with them, cards, he drank with them. I think a lot of it was Dad. I think the place, it was comfortable. They could come out with the kids. They didn't have to worry about them. They knew they were being taken care of. They were being taken care of. There was the freedom to choose your own activities, when, how, what. If you wanted a pack trip, you spoke about it, it'd be organized, it would happen. It's not like, okay, the 3rd week of every month is the pack trip. On Mondays we go to Phelps Lake. On Tuesdays we go to Taggart. Which a lot of the ranches now, it's a total schedule. And this is like people came and went, 10 days, a week, 2 weeks, a month. There was no, okay, on Sunday's downtime, we clean up the whole ranch. Monday the next group comes in, they leave on Saturday.
Yeah.
Which a lot of ranchers are going to that. The only thing that was really scheduled is Sunday, the horses get a day off, except if you ride to church. So then they get a half day off.
Okay. And was church down the chapel at Transfiguration?
Yes.
Was there in any way a comparable female figure that counterbalanced your father? Was there, or did you not have understand the role of the Kiddy Wrangler? But was there any woman that functioned in the horses or in any kind of leadership role that women could aspire to, or did they?
There were times we had female wranglers. Ann Messler was one of them that I can remember right off the top of my head. That so it just I think there was there's more guys who wanted to do that than there were females. It wasn't a matter of, okay, this is a man's job. It's just that it seemed like more of the guys went for that kind of a job. Trying to think of any other. Judy was, if she wasn't doing the children, she was taking care of adults, and same with me. It depended on who was here and what was wanted. It was only when I got pregnant that I no longer had to get up at 4 to wrangle.
Wow. Did you ever have any association with the Rockefellers? Did I ask that question today?
I didn't know that was possible.
Okay. So really a different world over there?
It was a different world. If we rode down the moraine toward JY, they had a fence, no gate in it where the trail was. No, it was private.
Okay, no sneaking over the fence to look at the Rockefellers?
No,
Okay.
I would have never dreamt of doing that.
Interesting.
I dreamt of a lot of things, but not that one.
Not that one. Okay.
I remember one of our pranks. The park was being very efficient about getting up roads, traffic signs everywhere, and we decided, I'm glad you've been to Phelps Lake, that it was really important to have a stop sign there so people didn't just go over the edge. So we managed to get one there in the night.
Well, let's talk about the path that your life took from about 1965, 66, which the last time you were here. I guess it would have been when Nona said, come and get your stuff or it's going to the dump.
In the summertime, Jim would guide float trips, fishing and scenic. I would drive them. By that time, I had both children. So.
And you were living in town?
We lived on Antelope Flats at Moulton's. The pink house out on Antelope Flats, there's 2 little log houses. We lived in one of them for one summer until the snow was blowing between the logs and we had snowdrifts next to the bed. And then we moved into town. I was talking with the kids and saying, okay, well, where did you move after that? We moved between 2 and 4 times every year until we had a place in Skyline, which is when David started school.
Wow.
And so, do I remember exactly when I moved from one spot to the other? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I remember living one winter in a cinder block house in Jackson, cold. You never warm those things up. Christmas tree fell down. I miscarried. That was no very good winter.
So did your husband just want to sort of make his own business, doing a tourist trade thing?
And he did. He basically did. He worked for Vern Bressler for a while out of the tackle shop at Moose. He was partners with Jack Dennis for a while. Jim had the permit to float the river in Snake River in the park. Jack did not. So that formed their relationship. He taught. We worked at the fish hatchery for a while. Again, what happens when I get confused? But I was pregnant with Tammy. We were living in a trailer next to the fish hatchery. He was he was a fishery major. And just before Tammy was born, and my side job there was siphoning dead fish eggs out of these hatching trays.
Yikes.
But just before Tammy was born, we moved into one of their houses down there.
Mm-hmm.
Tammy was born in May
Of what year?
66.
Okay.
The day I brought Tammy home from the hospital, David got hit in the nose with a golf club. And I've had David for 3 years. I'd had this other thing for 48 hours. Grabbed a receiving blanket to catch the blood, off to the hospital, then realized I had to call the neighbor, turn the oven off, take care of the baby.
Wow.
In July, one of Jim's fishing friends, clients really, called and said they want a trip. So he went to the fisher manager and said, well, do you want a job or do you want to fish? And Jim said, well, I guess I'll fish. Back in the tent. And Jim guided. And then he went back to school in Laramie. He got teachers. He did all his master's work, all the collection for the master's work, but didn't put it together. But he taught junior high, which was exactly his developmental level. We bought property in Skyline, built there. And in the summer I was driving float strip trips still.
That he was guiding?
That he was guiding.
Okay.
He took some trips down, the spring trips were down to the Green River.
Mm-hmm.
And he came back from one of those trips and was bragging about how wonderful this barmaid was. And okay, this is the end for me. And invited him to move out. So he moved into a different lady's house. I rented my house out to the concert people, and I moved into a tent.
Wow.
I cooked at a dude ranch over in Dubois for Fran Box, Bitterroot.
You cooked it off with Bitterroot, okay.
Kids ran wild. Well, they had a fence. They could run wild with inside the fence, and they were visible to me all the time. And that's, I think, that following that winter, a friend gave me a quarter of a moose, and I was on food stamps. Cleaned houses, worked at the Pink Garter as a hostess for a while.
The Pink Garter is where?
It was in town. I don't know if it exists anymore.
Yeah, it's still.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, it was a supper club thing. Worked for a little while as the secretary for the Ramada Inn, but it was tied up with Snow King. It was tied up into about 4 different businesses, and I stayed over like an hour to sell tickets to Snow King, and said I had to get home to the kids, and went home and got fired. And that spring I met Bill Peck, and we eventually got married.
Okay.
His lungs would not take Jackson Hole anymore. He'd just get violently ill in the wintertime, cough till he'd break ribs, decided we needed to move south.
Mm-hmm.
And he had been to Tucson a lot because he would go down there in the winter with his family before his wife died and the kids moved out. And so he got a job he was a horseman.
Mm-hmm.
Raised in upstate New York on a farm. But when his dad died, his mother moved in town, bought a big house, and started a hospital. She was an RN. And at that point, an RN could have a hospital.
Wow.
So sometimes he was called home from school to hold the anesthetic for procedures.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So then we all moved to Tucson. The next year we got married.
About what year is this now?
We got married in 75.
Okay.
Eddie Basha, who is a local grocer down there, very, very...
I've shopped at Bash's down there.
Okay, yeah. Asked Bill if he wanted to start an emergency room, coverage for the Chandler Hospital. And so he'd read about Bill in the National Enquirer, which touted him as a rich Florida doctor who turned into a horse wrangler. He got a lot of offers for marriage from women all over the United States.
Wow.
So we went up and talked to Eddie Basha, and he got that job, so we moved up into Mesa. And our neighbors, when we explained that in the summertime we'd just travel up and down the Rocky Mountain spine, little blue roads, and which are mostly dirt roads.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, then you would like Young, Arizona. So we drove to Young, Arizona, and it's a miniature Jackson Hole.
Wow.
Without the peaks. You know, it's right tucked into the Mogollon Rim.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very green valley, a village of about 800 people, and found a piece of property right up against the Forest Service with a log cabin that had no plumbing and that had one electric cord that was plugged into a light and a refrigerator. Otherwise, no facilities. Bill was still working that first summer. I basically stripped the cabin of the wallpaper, which consisted of newspapers, oilcloth, chinked with underwear, and a lot of dehydrated vermin.
Yeah. All right.
We took out a couple walls. The cabin was built in such a way that the rough plank 1x12s were nailed to the floor joists before they put the floors in. So to remove those, I have to hand saw at floor level to get those boards out, which I did. And we had it electrified, we had it plumbed. I laid flooring, I put up wainscoting, sheetrock.
Is this the place you live right now too? So you're going back to do more sheetrock, or?
No. This is when we first moved to Young, and we had 12.5 acres, and I decided that for 72 years old that was more than I wanted to handle. So I'm trying to simplify and downsize.
Okay.
So I sold that property, with which I've been able to draw in a much smaller place.
Okay. Okay.
Which I designed to my function,
Yeah.
which fit no one else's floor plan.
Well, you talked about working for the Forest Service?
Forest Service, yes.
Are you currently employed with the Forest Service, or?
Oh, I finally retired. Yeah, last year I worked for them.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, I retired and went back to work, but that was kind of walking backwards into something. While Bill was working as a doctor when we were living in Young. He worked some in Young, but he also did locum tenens, which is to fill a space. And so he worked in Tucson quite a bit, and a lot of different places, but Tucson, different places there quite a bit, and I was down there. And I started hiking with the group, and I took care of Ellen Dornan one day a week, and whatever her needs were, special time with her.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we went back home, I started hiking with the folks over in Payson, and the district ranger discovered that I walked. And his wilderness ranger had bad knees and could only ride, and he had been unable to figure out a way to push that measuring wheel you see on the roads at accidents, that thing, from a horse. But he found somebody who could walk. So I volunteered 1,500 hours, measured 83 miles of trail in our district, Pleasant Valley Ranger District, Tono National Forest. And Tommy Jones, the wilderness ranger, had a massive heart attack, and Tommy said, "You can do this job, you can do this job, apply for my job." So I went to the district ranger, and he said, "Oh, well, you're in your mid-50s, why don't you just wait a year, you can sign up for the senior program, you can wash toilets down at Roosevelt." The mule in me kicked in. I don't know if you know about mules, but got my ire up, to say the least. So I started putting in applications all up and down the Rocky Mountain spine. Ended up getting an offer in the Scapegoat Wilderness out of Lincoln, Montana. Not next door.
Mm-hmm.
When I put in the application, they're not really supposed to ask your age, but they can kind of figure it out from things.
Yeah. Other questions they ask.
Right, yeah. And I thought, they're going to think I'm an old woman. I've got to show them I'm viable. So I said on the phone, "Well, I'll just happen to be in Montana such and such a week. Could I stop in and visit?" Like heck, I was going to Montana. But I did. Got in the truck with a camper and headed up there, had the interview, and got the call to say no. And meanwhile, Bill was encouraging me, but encouraging with idea, encouraging when it becomes reality can be two different things.
Mm-hmm.
So he was working down in Tucson. I called him up and I said, "Okay, time to put up or shut up. I got an offer." He said, "Go for it."
Wow.
So I took the 71 Ford truck up to Montana and spent 4 months in the Scapegoat Wilderness with various mules and horses. Along with the grizzly and with the wolves. And you know how you can tell that a wolf is calling? Every hair on your body stands up. There is something
inherent
that knows that that's a predator too.
Wow. So, let me ask, Bill, is he still around?
He died in 2006.
Okay.
I was able to keep him home. Well, my first husband was immature, so my second one was 21 years older than me.
Okay.
I go to extremes sometimes.
Yeah. Well, Sharon asked this question early on. Your life's path seems to point towards wilderness, and that's. I'm going to make an assumption, and you can correct me. That's got to be tied to whitegrass. Got to be tied to these mountains back here, the landscape.
If I didn't have the connection to the land, and especially the wild lands. There'd be no way that I'd end up in wilderness as an adult. I think to a lot of people, and to me very particular and very personally, you know, wild lands is my comfort zone. It's my recharging area. It's my church.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very connected. And I think the idea of wilderness is spiritually important to a lot of people, even if they don't really get there. I think it's something inherent in way back in being a human,
Mm-hmm.
which is also being a mammal and an animal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's conclude. Unless you, I mean, feel. Let's conclude by talking about this place here. And this is these are kind of like philosophical questions, I guess, or something like that. Something you said on the phone that whoever was running the Bear Paw Dude Ranch could not figure out why Whitegrass was so successful, because in his mind it was poorly run by a bunch of drunk cowboys. Whitegrass. Your thoughts, comments, reflections on that?
He ran an extremely well-run ranch.
He being
Jack Hyler.
Mm-hmm.
Another great personality in Jackson Hole. And basically we were kind of next door. They were right down the Moose Wilson Road past the RLAZS.
Okay.
But there's something that I think is not the buildings, is not the people. There is something like gravity or magnet or spirit in this opening.
Mm-hmm.
That grabs most people. That is different from the ordinary land. I don't know if it could be compared to some of the Indians saying it's a spiritual place or it's a spiritual mountain. This was a meeting ground for the Indians when they came in the summer to hunt and gather. We found artifacts when we were digging up the fields.
And didn't they name it?
And that my understanding is that they named this opening, which once upon a time was all sage, as Whitegrass, because from the valley the sage looks, there's a white strip up here. So that my understanding, that's where the name originated, is through the Indian terminology.
You know, I think you also said something too, that the essence of this place is above and beyond memories. I think you're talking about the spirituality of the land, or something like that. I thought that was kind of a profound insight.
There's something that really holds people. Yeah.
When you came back in the 1980s, 1985, Frank dies, the place reverts to the park, and the park had this sort of philosophy of, we'll just let this place go back to nature. Sometimes they'd either bulldoze the places or light them on fire and just let it revert. But you came back. To talk about that experience of coming back after the place had shut down.
Like the hike that I took through here, is that what? Yeah. Came back With the hiking group, we've been doing a lot of hiking, and one of the, what now we call the bucket list, was to hike the Skyline Trail, which is now the Teton Crest Trail. Just being boisterous, and I don't have any emotions about this place or anything, and marching through, and this is the main cabin, that's why we ate where we ate, and that's where the barn was, and that's what the horses were, and just holding all that back and getting about halfway up through the line of cabins, and the emotion just hit. And no one's going to see Cindy cry, so I just put my legs into third gear and marched as faster than any of them could north till I got my composure. And I've thought about that before. I'd been up here in the winter time since it had been abandoned, and it wasn't a problem. It was being here in summer and it was abandoned that really hit me. In the winter, it always was abandoned. Mm-hmm. The cabins are covered with snow. Cabins were covered with snow. You skied through. Nothing's different. But not having any people here in the summer, and the liveliness, and you're right, community. As all communities, there are layers, and all of that existed. And having none of that, it was dead. And that's what got me.
And what's it like? My final question, and then Sharon, if you have some other follow-up questions for you. What's it like now to come back with new life breathed into this place? The Western Center for Historical Preservation. The cabins have been rehabilitated, some of them. And what's that like for you?
The only constant in life is change. I hate waste. It's being utilized. And I think that's wonderful. No, it's not like when Marmee had it, which was entirely different than when Frank and Inga had it, when Frank and Nona had it, when it was abandoned. Do we know where we came? Do we remember the womb? No. We know now. Do we know where we're going? No. It's all a progression. This is a new life for Whitegrass. And I think it's not what it was before. I don't feel a part of what the preservation is doing, but I appreciate it being used. That it has going to go on. It's going to have a life. Yeah. It's different, but so life is different from time to time to time.
Yeah, beautiful. Sharon, do you have any follow-up questions?
No.
Becky? Whew. Well, Cindy, you know what? You are a Green Beret. You, in terms of endurance, this has been absolutely wonderful, and you've got the gift of endurance. At least that's one of your gifts, that you're able to talk like this.
You.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful.
Archived in the Grand Teton National Park and the Jackson Hole Historical Society and Museum are additional Frank Galey stories, Whitegrass videos, historical photographs, and artifacts from the ranch. The archives also include oral histories from dudes, wranglers, community leaders, preservationists, and staff from the National Park Service.